Good evening, sir.
How many have joined till now?
Six, sir, six.
Okay. So just wait for 1 or 2 minutes, then we'll start.
Yes, sir.
Okay, we'll start. So what
Yes, sir.
we have left yesterday with this vulnerability assessment. So how the vulnerabilities of people or societies or of states can be assessed. So there are some common factors like people should be assessed on the basis of their gender, whether male, female, by their age and by their health. So people can be divided into different categories in terms of their health status, in terms of their age, and in terms of their gender, or in terms of their geographical locations. Then they can be classified as vulnerable, most vulnerable, or less vulnerable in terms of their livelihood. That means what types of work they are doing or job they are doing to earn for their livelihood. Then, suppose they are engaged in agriculture, they are engaged in fisheries. So, whenever there is a cyclone, those who are engaged in sea fishing, those who are going to sea for fishing, they must be targeted for disaster risk reduction, or they should be prevented from going to sea when it is turbulent. Then, in terms of building, so what kind of building is there? Suppose in a earthquake prone area, whether they are quake resistant buildings or normal buildings which can be demolished easily if there is a earthquake of a lower richer scale. Then we have cultural assessment. What kind of buildings are there in the community? Library, school, etc., etc. Then you have what kind of local institutions they have, like panchayat system or local governance system in urban area and panchayat system in rural area. So with this, that chapter is finished. That is vulnerability assessment. So these are criteria or aspects that has to be taken into account if there will be assessment of vulnerable people for disaster management or disaster risk reduction. Then in the seventh chapter, we find the resource analysis and mobilization. You see any program, not only this disaster management program or analysis or disaster reduction or mitigation, whatever may be the term you use, you need money, you need resources. So we have two kinds of resources. One is financial resources, another is human resources. So financial resources is crucial in the sense that you need money for everything. When you need technology, you need relief material, you need people. So we need money. Then we have human resources, the people who will be engaged in disaster risk reduction, the entire bureaucracy, entire people, they need motivation, etc. That we will discuss later. But there are two kind of resources. So how these resources can be created, mobilized, and collected, kept at hand for disaster reduction. So disaster mitigation or reduction or management is not a single day affair or single night affair, or we cannot wait a disaster to come and then we will prepare ourselves or go into action. It is not that. It is a continuous process. It is a sustainable process. That means we are continuously preparing ourselves. We means as a state or as a society or as a community, and for this continuous preparation, we need these resources. And we must have these resources at our hand so that we can plan or program or take a step or a policy for disaster mitigation. This is very important. So we have two kinds of resources, money or finance and human resources. So far as finances are concerned, normally till now, it is government funding or government finance. So in India, it is state government, central government, and there is always a acrimony between central government and state government. And almost all the state governments accuse central government that they are not giving the due, as I was telling yesterday. So actually, in this paper, what has happened? There are some repetitions in different chapters. Same thing has been retold in different ways where there is a necessity in a particular chapter. So this will happen. So you must be cautious of that. It is not that you will write in first chapter and if there is a question in the second chapter and there is a necessity of writing that again, so you have to write. So holistically you have to answer. That means in toto, or in totality. Answers must be in totality. So understanding must be in totality. That's why there is a recurrence of different ideas or concepts in different chapters. That's obvious and natural. So for this type of course is concerned. So, government mobilize, finance mobilization is very crucial. Till now, all over the world, it is not India, and in India it is maximum. The entire funding for disaster management, pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster comes from government money till now. So now there are new concepts. What are the new concepts? State money. This is number one crucial, very crucial factor, and almost all money comes from the state for disaster management. Then you have local governments. Local governments, this municipality or panchayat. So it's a total failure in India. So far India is concerned, resource mobilization by panchayat raj institutions or one local bodies is not possible. Actually, they are waiting to get money from state or center. These local bodies, they don't have the capacity to mobilize resources for disaster mitigation, particularly financial resources. They can mobilize or they can have these human resources, but they cannot have or cannot mobilize financial resources. The planning for financial resources or their mobilization for financial resources sometimes becomes more expensive than the money collected. Suppose a panchayat or a district, Jila Parishad or a block, panchayat samiti, is asked to mobilize funding in terms of money for a disaster mitigation plan in their area. So what will happen? They will convene a meeting, they will give tasks, and in this process, the money they will spend will be less than the money collected. So that is the tragedy. But somehow urban areas have some capability. Suppose Brihan Mumbai Municipal Corporation, Surat Municipal Corporation, Ahmedabad Municipal Corporation, Delhi, Kolkata. These are big municipal corporations, so those who have sufficient resources and they can mobilize resources because there are big business houses there, medium business houses there, small business houses there. So they can mobilize some kind of funding for disaster management in their area. Now a new concept has developed so far as this resource mobilization is concept, that is CSR. What is CSR? Corporate social responsibility. So every corporation, that is a private company or a government company, they have a responsibility towards their society. So we have a mining fund in Keonjhar, in other mining areas. There are huge amounts of money in Odisha, this mining fund. So mines are asked, or mining companies are asked to render services under the head of corporate social responsibility. There is a much debate about that, whether it is justified or not, whether we are ignoring their negative functioning by taking some money from them. That is not the question. Public sector corporations can be asked to pay, as Odisha Mining Corporation is giving. Suppose there is a Corona fund under the leadership of Chief Minister Relief Fund. Then Odisha Mining Corporation came forward and gave money. And Tata Steel came forward, suppose they you asked to give money. So this is called corporate social responsibility. Like PM Care Fund was created for Corona management, pandemic management, and many corporations gave money. That is for specified purpose. But there is corporate social responsibility is a mechanism developed recently that companies or corporations or industrial houses or big business houses, they will contribute some percentage of their earning or profit towards social responsibility, and these money can be mobilized for disaster management. This is a new source of funding which everybody is stretching from United Nations globally to Odisha or India locally. That is what is happening. Then government finance, state finance, and corporate social responsibility. We have this arrangement between state government and central government. In state government is dependent on central government. So state government gets money. There is some arrangement in 2000, 1999, 2000, 2002, 2004. That is Calamity Relief Fund, CRF. There is a fund earmarked for that, and states are getting from them. Then there is Calamity Relief Fund and NCCF, National Calamity Contingency Fund. From these, states will get their due. That is National Calamity NCCF. You can write it down. National Calamity Contingency Fund. That is one. Then you have Calamity Relief Fund, CRF, Calamity Relief Fund. So there are committees at the national level of the CRF, Calamity Relief Fund, and also at the state level. So Chief Secretary is the chairman of the State Calamity Relief Fund. So what happens? So it is a matching grant of 75-25 proportion. That means 75% of money is given by the center, and another 25% is matched by the states. States contribute to that. But here it is clearly written, directed that state government for their administrative expenses of the calamity relief fund. Suppose there will be meeting of calamity relief fund, there will be movement of officials of calamity relief fund, and these expenses will not be borne out of calamity relief fund. These expenses will not be taken from that fund. These are regular expenses which will be met by state government from its normal budget. Normally, the budget expenses or the expenses will limit from the budgetary allocations from this. So there will be no expense on regular administrative management from this fund. This is another important thing. Then we have this World Bank proactive policy. So World Bank have certain guidelines for this disaster resource analysis and resource mobilization. So what is the guidelines of World Bank? So first, World Bank says that there must be sustainable development for disaster reduction. That means if we go by sustainable policies of sustainable development, that is conservation of nature, not destruction of nature, then there will be less disaster, and obviously there will be less pressure on societies or states or communities for disaster reduction. Then risk management should be made part of planning and public policy and budget. So there must be planning for disaster management or risk reduction. Then there must be research on disaster mitigation. That means universities, big institutions, think tank groups, they must be asked to research on this topic. That is how disasters can be managed, how disaster can be risk reduced, and how disaster risk can be reduced or disaster can be mitigated. Then we must have the policy of audit. There must be audit provision as suggested by the World Bank. That is important. So World Bank has some general guidelines for this resource mobilization and resource analysis. Then in India, as per agreement with or in consultation with Indo-American Development Bank, we accepted their plan, also plan of the World Bank, and we developed our own. So, what are the broad features of this policy? That is, we accepted the World Bank plan and ADB plan, and we suggested that what are the broad features? That we must have link between disaster management and development. So earlier disaster management was separate and development was separate. So we must have such kind of development in which there will be less disasters, less calamities, less hazards. So that must be planned. So development should be like that. That we must evolve development paradigms so that there will be less disasters. But this is not happening. This is theoretically it is correct. Theoretically we are doing this, uh, at least in pen and paper. But in practice we are not doing this because whatever we are doing, our industries are clearly polluting our rivers. That is destruction of nature. Our industries are cutting forests, are leading to the cutting or felling of forests. That is disaster. And we are creating pollutions, greenhouse gas emissions, etc. So theoretically, we have accepted the model, and we have developed our own model on the basis of the models of World Bank or ADB. ADB here is not Asian Development Bank; it is Indo-American Development Bank. So IDB. So IDB's suggestion and World Bank suggestion and our own suggestion combined together have developed into a model. So what is that model? First is we must have a development process or development policy which will reduce the risk of natural disasters, which will reduce the risk of man-made disasters. But we are not following that. Then is connecting program for managing natural disasters. So we must connect various programs for managing the natural disasters. Then stress on forecasting and warning. So earlier we are waiting for the disaster. Now technology has developed, knowledge has developed, science has developed, research has developed. So by using modern technology, developed technology, or by bringing in modern technology from other developed countries, we can develop our warning system, radar system, and etc. The forecasting system. So earlier we can see the danger. That is forecasting. Then we can warn people, popularize people, make people aware that a cyclone is coming with such dangerous trends. So we must be very careful about that. But it should not create panic. We should not create panic among the population. We should be cautious about that. We should not create panic. So next is access to food grains. So it is very important. Two things: access to food during disaster and before disaster. That means food grains must be ensured to all and each people, everywhere, particularly to the marginalized people, those who are poor, those who don't have the capacity to buy food, particularly during a disaster. They must be given sufficient food, and their access to food must be ensured. That is most important. Then mitigation through specific plans. We have specific disasters. We have floods, we have cyclones, we have earthquakes, we have pest attack, so many kinds of, we have fire. So when specific disasters are there, specific planning or specific design must be there for their mitigation. Because you cannot fight cyclone with firefighting technology, or you cannot fight fire with cyclone management technology. So two are different, and you must be prepared for two. And therefore, you have to mobilize resources. Then district disaster management must be continuous. It cannot be stopped. It must be continuously developing. It should continuously develop. That is important. So ADB has these points. Then we have this National Center for Disaster Management. We have a National Center for Disaster Management, and it must have connectivity to other disaster management centers all over the world. So wherever there are national disaster management centers, we must be connected to that through network and other. uh, factors or other ways means. That is important, right? So then we have uh, continuous continuous process of public awareness. That means we must make public aware about the disaster, and then community participation. Then we must prepare our community physically and mentally to participate in the disaster mitigation program or disaster management program. Then we have observation of national disaster reduction day. Like any other day, the people will be conscious. So these are the certain guidelines or plan of Indian disaster management policy. So India has developed such policies. Then we have resource mobilization. I have already said you local resources. They don't have a rule for that. Then we have corporate responsibility, state government, central government. So these are the resource sources of resources or funding. One is government, whether state government or central government. Another is local institutions like Panchayat Raj or urban local bodies. So they don't have a practical role. They are almost a failure. So far India is concerned. Then we have this corporate social responsibility, um, contributions from corporations, private, public and private. Then in newly we have this civil society resource mobilization. The role of NGOs. There are big NGOs out there. Oxfam is there. CRY, Child for Rights, for Child Rights for You. CRY is there. Then we have this Green Global, that is Greenpeace. All the big NGOs there which mobilize resources from various sectors by inducing the tax-free arrangement, and they also contribute during natural disasters. So government agencies, community agencies, local bodies should have contact with them, and during disaster they must be mobilized to help. And also when there is no disaster, they should be mobilized to make people aware, or to mobilize human resources, or to mobilize tools, technologies, and instruments or other materials required for a disaster as relief material. So this is all about resource mobilization. You can find, I'm just giving you, there is a table that is an important table. I'm just making our, that is type and characteristics of corporate social responsibility, because these are emerged as a new one. So philanthropic, charitable, they contribute donations and grants to in cash or kind they give. So maybe formal, based on a request or contract or agreement, maybe business controls, maybe a short term or long term. Then contractual. Contractual means there is a contract between two parties, between corporations and other parties, and this contract with groups and organizations to provide relief material or resources or money. Then sponsored. Some companies sponsor their program, their advertisement, and give money during disasters. They provide relief for their advertisement. Then collaborative. So there must be working partnership with other organizations, like whether it is government or non-government, and they carry their program with all stakeholders, and greater emphasis shared, mutual respect, and all these principles of contract. Then this unilateral, they on their own give money or material or human resources for disaster mitigation. Who? These corporates. So then building resilience through risk sharing and transfer. So risk should be shared and transferred, and through that a resilient system should be developed. And there are different points. You need not go for that, because we have to finish this chapter. Then civil society initiative for relief. I have already told you. Civil society means who coordinates resource with this organization. There are civil society organizations like NGOs. There must be coordination by the government and other agencies or local agencies, and they can be used. This coordination process or coordination chain can be used for resource mobilization as well as for disaster mitigation. So NGOs have a great role to play. They are playing also in different parts of the world. So for India is concerned, there are so many NGOs who work in disaster management, pre-disaster, during disaster, and post-disaster. In post-disaster construction, many NGOs came forward and helped people by giving relief material, by giving other material help as well as mental. Suppose one NGO will give free books or free notebooks or education material, learning material to the students or children of that affected area, whether it is earthquake or flood or cyclone. So they can send materials also, or money, or food, or whatever it may be, and also human resources. Maybe suppose Andhra government send in post 99 cyclone their electrician to restore our electric system in Odisha. That is a kind of help of human resources. So human resources are important like financial resources. So the whole objective of this chapter is to stress on resource mobilization and planning for this mitigation. So these are the guidelines, and for this we need money. How can you need money? There are four sources. One is the government sources, whether it is state government or central government. Then you have these local government sources. Then you have CSR fund, corporate social responsibility fund, or help from the corporations, private or government. Then you have civil society mobilizations like NGO, etc. Right? So these are the corporate social responsibility or civil society organizations who come forward to help communities or states when there is a disaster, and when before disaster and after disaster. Then we'll shift to the next chapter, that is disaster mitigation. So as you know, this is a new science, disaster mitigation. Some of you was asking about this ISRO program. In ISRO program or ISRO study, ISRO courses of study will find disaster mitigation. So disaster mitigation is known as an evolving science. It's a new science. It is developing. It has not yet fully developed. So what is actually that? So mitigation means a long-term plan of action to reduce the risks or dangers of a disaster. So by long-term planning, by long-term action or continuous action, we can reduce the dangers of a disaster, the ill effects of a disaster. That is called mitigation. So how disaster can be mitigated? Who are the factors responsible for disaster mitigation? And we can mobilize the factors. Number one. Number two, how resources can be mobilized for disaster mitigation? How planning can be made for disaster mitigation? And how models of disaster mitigation can be developed, different paradigms out of the experience. It's not that I will think, you will think we will have a new paradigm or new model of disaster mitigation. It's not like that. We learn from disasters. Suppose we have funny, we found that we managed funny very well, but there is lacunas in many areas. Suppose one area is coordination. There is no coordination between forest department, fire department, and other departments to clear the roads by cutting the trees, because there are so many felling of trees by funny cyclone in Bhubaneswar. Almost half of the trees were uprooted in Bhubaneswar. How they can clean for the smooth movement of people and vehicles on the roads of Bhubaneswar? You need that. So we found that there is no coordination. How before a disaster coordination can be made? So this is a planning of disaster mitigation. So you need the involvement of different departments. Suppose you need fire department, you need transport department, you need this food department, health department, education department, hospitals, medicals, staff of those paramedical, paramedical staff of hospital, doctor, nurses. So you have to coordinate with all the departments, those who are involved. Suppose now there is pandemic, and out of that learning, we are managing pandemic. So now we learn from pandemic that these are the lacunas, these are the deficits, these are the wantings. So we can fill up in our next program. So this is a continuous process. Disaster mitigation is a continuous process for which it is called as developing science. So this emerged in 19th century particularly. So why this has developed? First we need, suppose earlier there are diseases, these epidemics, this is cholera and etc. We scientifically analyzed and found that cholera is being born out of the virus, out of a particular region, for which we need hygiene and sanitation. So hygiene and sanitation can prevent cholera. So likewise, we are also learning that is the process is called demystification of natural disasters. That means there is mystic surrounding natural disasters like epidemic. So we need to demystify them. How can we demystify them? By observing scientific method, scientific technology, and scientific analysis. So from a scientific analysis, we can know why these natural disasters are happening, why cyclone is happening, why floods are coming. We need to identify scientific reasons behind them. So this is called a process of demystification. So after demystification, we can have a plan for this. This is occurring, and we have to check the reasons, causes of a what these natural disasters. Why earthquake is happening? You cannot prevent the cause of earthquake. That is the up and down of plates under earth. So that is called what? This is a displacement of plates under earth. So you cannot prevent that, but you can assess how or when, who are the prone areas or vulnerable areas so far quake is concerned. Suppose Odisha, some parts of Odisha are quake prone. In Himalayan area, some areas are quake prone. In Japan, it regularly recurs. How Japan is managing, we will learn from them. So earthquake prone houses you need, because Gujarat earthquake taught us that because of the poor structure of buildings, there is a huge loss of life and loss of buildings. So that's why mitigation is a long-term plan, and we must be prepared for that. This is a systematic theory. We need that. In 1994 and 97, from this Urban Development Ministry developed a map, atlas, that is called Vulnerability Atlas of India. That means which areas of India, which geographical areas of India, which places of India are vulnerable to different kinds of disaster, whether cyclone, flood, or whatever it may be, right? So these are vulnerable areas, and we have atlas to identify them, and we identified what kind of disaster will come in that places. So we'll have involvement of this community of those places by which we can mitigate the disaster. So disaster mitigation is a theory. Then we can use the scientific methods of this is GIS, this is GPS, global positioning system, geographical information system. Then this disaster management plan can be based on that. So this is important. Then we have mitigation measures. What measures we can take for mitigating disasters or disaster mitigation? What are the measures that we require? So measures are divided into two groups. One is structural measures and another is non-structural measures. So in structural measures, we need engineering plans. In non-structural measures, we need the contextual plans. That is education. We need to educate people on them. Then we need evacuation planning. You know evacuation planning. Suppose there is a cyclone in Gopalpur sea beach. All the people living close to Gopalpur, where there will be direct hit of the cyclone on earth, on land, or I mean, we tell that is landfall. So when there will be landfalling of the cyclone, how many kilometers of areas will be affected? Suppose it is 50 kilometers or 100 kilometers. Then 50 kilometers or 20 kilometers, whatever the area may be, by scientific study, the people living in that area must be evacuated. You know there is a severe cyclone in Cuba. So they evacuated millions of people to different places, and there was very less death. So world learned from them. Now world is learning from Odisha. So how we have ensured zero casualty. So evacuation is a major concern. How evacuation can be possible if you go and tell people that you please come and sit down in our vehicle, we will take you to school or building or a separate building. So many people will not come. Majority of people will not come. So you cannot use force. It's a democratic system. You cannot lathi charge them or forcefully them. So you have to make them aware through public education that this is dangerous for you. You need safety. You should go to other places. So that is most important. That's why you need public awareness as well as public education for evacuation, and you need scientific methods of evacuation. So that is a non-structural strategy of disaster mitigation. Then you have anti-quake building. Anti-quake building, if there is an earthquake, then you need anti-quake building. That is engineering method and structural mitigation. Earthquake or resistant building, we call it as earthquake resistant building. And then from this non-structural, you have warning systems. You have warning systems. That means your warning system must be up to date, scientific, developed, so that We can learn from early warning systems, from the global warning systems, from the national warning systems, from the local warning systems, and this information must be uh, shared to the public. Then with this warning system, we complete this non-structural mitigation measures. Then there is institution building. We need institutions for that. So what is structural mitigation? Structural mitigation is engineering mitigation. That means I gave the example of earthquake resistant buildings. That is one example. So you have to identify problem areas. Suppose how floods can be checked, or how floods can be controlled. That is the engineering plan or structural mitigation. Then we have cost benefit analysis. What is the cost? How cost can be met, and how less cost will be there in disaster mitigation plan. How cost can be reduced? That is most important. You cannot afford such a huge cost in disaster mitigation. So there are so many issues in cost benefit analysis, because you resist a minor earthquake without damage, so that will be cost effective. How can this be possible? Resist moderate earthquakes without significant structural damage, but with some non-structural damage. How can this be possible? If you build homes which are quake resistant, earthquake resistant, then in case of a minor earthquake or a moderate earthquake, there will be almost zero damage. And in case of heavy earthquake with a 7 or 8 Richter scale or more than that, then there will be severe damage. But you can prevent this damage. So this is what about I told these principles. Then there are guiding principles of mitigation. What are guiding principles of mitigation? That means how mitigation can be carried out. What are the basic principles of mitigation? First is initiation. What is initiation? That means disaster offer unique opportunities to introduce mitigation measures. Out of our past learning from different disasters, new initiatives can be taken up for disaster mitigation. That is called initiation. That somebody has to initiate, government or those people who are involved in disaster mitigation, they must initiate new ideas, innovative ideas, creative ideas, policies or principles for disaster mitigation. Then disaster mitigation can be introduced in three diverse contexts of reconstruction, new investment, and the existing environment. So there are three areas where initiatives can be taken up. One is context of reconstruction. We need reconstruction. That means what has been damaged, there will be reconstruction. New investment, there will be new investment, and the existent environment. So each area gives new opportunities, new challenges. We should initiate for that. Then management. So mitigation measures are complex. They are not easy. So there is huge responsibility in mitigation measures. For this we need effective leadership and coordination, and for this we need management. So management is very crucial in disaster mitigation, because what we need leadership, we need coordination. In many disasters, we see the lack of coordination has to lead disastrous consequences. That's why management is very important. How disasters can be managed. So we have to create institutions, we have to create policies, we have to create new laws, rules, and we have to give trained human resources for managing these affairs. And then mitigations will be most effective if safety measures is important through wide diversity of integrated activities. So safety measures is another important part of this management of disasters. Then mitigation must not be isolated from related elements of disaster planning, preparedness, and reconstruction. That means mitigation is not independent of disaster reconstruction or disaster planning or disaster preparedness. So all these have to be coordinated. We have already studied disaster preparedness and disaster planning in disaster management. So when there will be disaster mitigation, it must be linked to these ideas and principles of the idea. Then monitoring and evaluation. This is self-explanatory. You need to monitor your activities regularly through recurring meetings, analysis, and there must be evaluation. What has been achieved, how it is effective. There must be evaluation. Then prioritization. That means in disaster mitigation program, what are the priorities? What are the topmost priorities? Then what are the secondary priorities? Then there is the third priorities. So we must concentrate it on topmost priority. That means we should have a priority area. What are the critical areas? What are the critical economic interests? Who are the most vulnerable groups? So that we can develop policies of mitigation on the basis of our priority. Then institutionalization. All this cannot be just solved through lectures or dictates. We need to create institutions. That means the process of disaster mitigation should be and must be institutionalized. That is most important. Then towards mitigation, a clear and comprehensive national disaster management policy. That is the first step that we should take if we march towards mitigation. That means we need to go ahead with a concrete plan, right? We need to a concrete policy. So we need a disaster management policy. That is what we require. One second. This is number one. Number two is there must be adequate assessment and monitoring of disaster hazards and vulnerability. This is a repetition of what we studied in vulnerable analysis. That means we need to continuously assess who are the vulnerables, why they are vulnerables, and what strategy can be taken to protect the vulnerables. This is number two. Number three is adequate and accurate analysis of all reasonable mitigation projects. That means, suppose we are taking a project for a disaster mitigation, then this project should be analyzed accurately and adequately, sufficiently, so that we can identify the weak areas, the weak points, and take preventive measures to ensure that these weak points are not recurred. Then there must be a permanent disaster management authority or center or agency. So we need a permanent authority or agency for disaster mitigation plan, which will monitor. That means this is specialization or specialization job. This job must be given to that particular authority with the people who are trained, who have the knowledge, who have the experience, who have the capability in disaster management or mitigation. Then recognition that mitigations managers can originate from all levels of government, not only from the national level or top level. The disaster mitigation plan can originate, can be created, can be initiated at any level of governance. That is what is important. So that we can encourage creativity, new ideas at different levels. If you wait for national level, you cannot do on your own. And if lower agencies will wait for the state capital, nothing will come from districts or district administration or panchayat administration. That is not like that. So there should be multiple entry points of policy for long-term mitigation measures and from large mitigation measures. Like there are, suppose there is a crisis in agriculture out of a flood or cyclone, we need to help farmers. So we need to have a long-term plan, because you just cannot put some money in farmer's pocket and your job is over. Farmers' crops have been destroyed. How this can be solved? How they will be provided with crop input so that they can continue with their fraud? Suppose land quality has been destroyed, there will be sand, sufficient sand on their land. How this can be managed? So there are so many issues in this example of agriculture. And if you want disaster mitigation in agriculture, this is a long-term job, and this should need the assistance of specialist program or specialists for help. Then adequate public awareness and education programs under to help the communities, to help people and make them aware. Then we have regular monitoring and evaluation. I have already told you monitoring and evaluation. Then resources relevant to mitigation. That is most important. There is a table here. Activity, identification and analysis of disaster. This should be given to universities, research institutes, academic institutes, technical institutes, department and agencies concerned with hazards and disasters. Then hydrological department, seismological department, the geological department, department of geography. These are technical departments which deal with disasters and any kind of study or assessment or identification of the hazards or vulnerabilities should be given to these kind of institutions who have the expertise, who have the capability, and who can give inputs for policy making or for policy formulation. Even private sector authorities can be given the task. Even international agencies, those who have more expertise than us, more knowledge than us, more experience than us, so they can be given. Then we have implementation. So government agencies must be given implementation. Along with government agencies, we need the help of army, paramilitary forces, non-government agencies, international disaster authorities, disaster management authorities, etc. So for substantial programs in disaster mitigation, we need the help of non-government organization. We can give them general public, media, education institutions, and training authorities. They can be given the task to this long-term disaster mitigation. Then what are the special considerations? We need a broad strategy. We need we interdepartmental, interconnected, multi-stake strategy. That means all those who are involved, who has a stake, they should be brought together. It is not that you can do or I can do. It is not that government only can do, others cannot do. It is not that the NGO can do, others cannot do. So it is not like that. Even in government departments, it is not that there is a pandemic, only health department is responsible, it will do. No. We need the coordination of health department, education department, home department, law and order agencies, medical agencies, other human resources required for them. It's a collective effort. So we must have a multi-stakeholders approach to disaster mitigation. That is what is important. There must be annual progress report and analysis. What has happened annually? That must be assessed, and we must identify the weaknesses. Then they can be removed. Then sustainability. So for sustainability or sustainable campaign or sustainable disaster mitigation, what we need? Active public awareness program. Then we well documented success stories. We must find where there are success stories, and this must be replicated or followed everywhere. But the specific conditions of success stories must be kept in mind. So suppose in one place in Japan earthquake mitigation is successful, that does not mean the same model will be successful here. We can reorient them to our local conditions. Updating risk awareness and cost benefit analysis, institutional mitigation plan and program, then maintaining commitment. And finally, for successful program, we need culture of preparedness. That means we develop a culture of preparedness among the people, among the institutions, among the agencies. Culture of quick response. We should respond quickly without waiting a moment, because there is a huge risk if you neglect time. Culture of strategic thinking and culture of prevention. Then United Nations has a big role in disaster management and disaster mitigation. Actually, it is the United Nations which have developed various theories of models of disaster mitigation. There are various agencies involved in it. You can identify, you can write it down also. United Nations Disaster Relief Organization is one organization which have expertise in relief operations. That is UNDRO. Then UNDP, all of you know, United Nations Development Program. So how development can be sustainable, whether in agriculture, livestock, fishery, etc. Then Food and Agriculture Organization, and then World Food Program WF. All these are of United Nations, under the aegis of United Nations. Then World Health Organization, which have a major role in pandemic management, you know, in corona management, WHO. Then you have United Nations Center for Human Habitation. When there is a severe migration, disaster, habitat is destroyed, here comes the role of United Nations Center for Human Habitation. The UNICEF, you know, United Nations International Children's Emergency Fund, it has a great help toward the children all over the world when there is a disaster. To supply the study materials, to reconstruct their schooling, to help the teachers, to mentally help them to regain their mental health. So UNICEF, all of you know, there is a famous with a history of famous organization of United Nations with a history of commitment to the children. Then Asian Disaster Reduction Center is there, that is in Japan, in Kobe. Asian Disaster Reduction Center. Then Asian Disaster Preparedness Center, that is in Bangkok. Then Asia Pacific Disaster Management Center, that is in Manila, Philippines. So all these are key institutions or key organizations engaged in disaster mitigation, and they help India a lot. So then we find that this is not a easy task. So disaster mitigation as a theory, as a science, as a subject is developing. It is still in the process of development. And out of experience, out of learning, out of knowledge from all over the world, we can develop it. And this will a great help to India, where there is regular disasters, a regular recurrence of disasters. Then we have CBDM, community-based disaster management. Here in this chapter, this is a new approach you will see in World Disaster Report. There, earlier, government agencies are coming for help, and those are not successful 100%. So, out of this experience all over the world, we find that unless we involve the community, though India has a long history of community participation in disaster management or disaster mitigation, but that was not scientific. That was not a very objective, developed in an objective manner. So of late we learned that unless we involve community or we build community resilience, then we can go far ahead in disaster management or disaster risk reduction or disaster mitigation. So we developed a theory that is community role or community resilience. How can we develop community resilience? That is most important. So what is that? Hmm. That is active involvement of community in developing the preparedness or developing mitigation. So who knows best about disasters? It is the local people. So if you see how cyclone has affected, you can ask affected people. You cannot ask me or you or any writer or any bureaucrat sitting in Bhubaneswar or Delhi or United Nations headquarters that what is that. So out of experience we can write, we can develop a theory. But first let us go to the people who have been affected. Those are defined as affected people or the community who have been affected. They can say in what way a cyclone has affected them, in what way that has affected their mentality, in what way that have affected their families, in what way that has affected their agriculture, their health, their education, their building, their generations of saving, and so on. So out of that we can develop. Unless we involve themselves in the mitigation plan or mitigation program, we cannot have a successful story. So I think today's time is over. Mm, Again, capacity vulnerability analysis is there. I have already explained that. Rationale of the synergy, we need that. Who is participating? How is participation assured? What is the stage of participation accounting? How is the participation facilitated? That is that. And the concept of community. So we'll be discussing in the next class. And we have left today is 28, 29 and 30. We have two classes or three classes. How many
Two
classes?
classes, sir.
Achha, three classes.
Two classes.
Two classes.
Yes, sir. 30 is the
29,
last.
30 is the
29
last.
and 30.
What?
30 is the last,
29.
sir.
Acha. Okay, we'll finish that. So this is the, I think this is the ninth chapter where we started. Ninth, 10, 11,
Yes, sir.
12, and then another three chapter we can finish. So okay, thank you. So it's already
Thank you, sir.
5.
Thank you, sir.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.